we are pretty much near the end of Long's Peak. It's actually right up there. Now, this last part, we're actually gonna have to climb, and I'm an idiot and didn't bring my GoPro mount from ahead. So I'm probably gonna try the stupidest thing in the idea of stupidest ideas. I'm gonna put the GoPro in my mouth and I'll try to give you guys a bird's eye view that way. But hello fellow adventurers, Thor here, and today we are at Long's Peak, which is the most deadly 14er in Colorado. There have been more deaths on this hike slash climb, more like it, than any other, but some of them are kind of odd and mysterious. Some have died due to a fatal gunshot wound while climbing down, others get struck by lightning at the very top, and we're going to go over some of the oddest deaths, especially considering this is only a class 3 hike, whereas class 4s like Capital we did the other week are considered much more dangerous. So we're going to go ahead and knock this hike out. We're going over some of the oddities that happen on it and some of these stunning views that we can be looking forward to, and some GoPro footage of my favorite thing, which is actually going to be the Tro, and it's going to be a pretty intense look. Quick thing to also cover, this hike is about 14 miles and it is also 5,000 feet of elevation. So not one of the more difficult or longer or more exhausting 14ers, just a lot of risk factor, and it's also a hotspot for tourism, which does lead to a lot of deaths from inexperienced climbers thinking this is a good 14er to do. So we came across this pretty interesting sign. It's also like in an absolutely gorgeous area, and it brings us to our first death by lightning strike. Because a summiter made it all the way to the peak, he was suddenly hit right when a storm came in out of absolutely nowhere. We've gone over it many times in our videos before, but if you see any clouds approaching, get below the tree line. Do not stay up there. This one is very preventable. Unfortunately, he just got very unlucky. All right, so we got our first look at Long's Peak right here, and it brings me to one of the more interesting and likely deaths that will never ever again happen on this mountain. This happened in 1889, and it's the story of Frank Stryker. In a stretch called, well, the home stretch, he tripped, fell, and his firearm discharged, shooting himself. If you've ever seen the movie 8 Mile, he basically cheddar bombed himself, unfortunately, with a very slow, painful, bleeding out death. Now, in 1889, this makes a lot of sense with, needing weaponry for bears and mountain lions and even wolves at the time, until they were eradicated in about 1940. However, nowadays, you're likely not to have that due to the safeties on weapons, and, well, you don't really need a pistol anymore to climb this mountain. You can carry your bear mace, but the worst you're going to do is the can explodes and hits you in the face, and then, well, you might go blind, but it's better than being shot to death by yourself. All right, so we are nearly at Long's Peak. We're going to be doing the climb up very soon, but we have reached the boulder field. This is a class 3 scramble. This is way easier than Capital. I'll say, everything up to here has been far easier than Capital Peak was. It is important to note that there was actually a death in the boulder field as recently as 2016. Someone was descending down Long's, tripped, fell. They were from Texas. They were actually an experienced climber, but the fatigue got them. They didn't make a mistake. It wasn't a technical issue. They just simply got worn out and they fell to their death. So making sure that you are prepared for this hike is absolutely key. If you're not from Colorado, you need to make sure you drink tons of water when you get here. Sleep as close as possible to the trailhead elevation, because it will wear you out very quick. And if you're not prepared for it, well, unfortunately, you may end up like that hiker from Texas who passed away in 2016. Nearing the peak, we finally got some sun. And this is also the part where, if you have a fear of heights, that starts kicking in a little bit, because as you can see, is a very steep drop. And you pretty much have to climb alongside the shelf and do a little bit of climbing. Now, it's not nearly as bad as the nice edge or Capital's Peak. Still, you want to be careful and make sure you have good balance, because the last thing you want to do is go flying off the side of a mountain into a boulder field. All right, we are pretty much near the end of Long's Peak. It's actually right up there. Now, this last part, we're actually gonna have to climb, and I'm an idiot and didn't bring my GoPro mount from ahead. So I'm probably gonna try the stupidest thing in the idea of stupidest ideas. I'm gonna put the GoPro in my mouth and I'll try to give you guys a bird's eye view that way. But yeah, we'll see how this goes. So if it gets foggy, my bad. So obviously I have a GoPro in my mouth while I was filming this, so I can't actually talk, so I'm doing a voiceover. This is the home stretch, that part where I talked earlier where Strider actually ended up shooting himself. This is, well, the most fatal part of the hike. It has seen the most deaths of any one location on the mountain, with at least 7 confirmed ones, including one we're going to share at the end of the video, and, well, Striker, who we mentioned earlier. But now you can go ahead and listen to my heavy breathing while I do this, and hopefully it's the ASMR you were always looking for.
Oh, my jaw hurts.
All right, despite the fact that I had to carry the GoPro in my mouth on the hardest part of the hike, we did make it to the top of Capitol. Now, again, this is a class 3 hike, very dangerous compared to the other class 1 and class 2, but it isn't nearly as hard as, well, Capital. If you go back and watch my video there, you'll see that I'm hanging off like a 1,000-foot ledge for about a quarter of a mile, and the risk of death is far higher, especially if you're inexperienced. I think what causes a lot of deaths on this hike is a lot of people, because it's very close to Denver, they fly in as a tourist, they try it out thinking it's going to be a great time for their first 14er, and they just come woefully unprepared because this is not a beginner hike. But with that being said, there is one last stop we have to talk about in terms of deaths on this mountain, and it's probably the most impactful one, and also it might be able to actually save your guys' lives if you ever do this hike. All right, we're doing the descent. We got up to the top from trailhead to the top in about 3 hours, which is pretty good. Gonna make it a very short day. But the last death we were going to be talking about that has happened on Longs Peak actually belongs to Agnes right here. And this is a storm shelter built into the side. She was actually the first woman to actually climb Longs Peak. And that's why they built the storm shelter in her honor. And if we actually tie that back to the first one, we talked about the 2010 death where someone died due to a direct strike from a lightning hit. Well, this would have been the place to go. So always make sure if you're doing a 14er, you look to see if there's any storm shelters on the mountain that you can go to for a quick rescue. If not, make sure that the weather is good, or at least that you're at the peak by noon. But that's going to be this hike. It wasn't that bad. It was a lot easier than Capitol Peak, but it was a fun one overall. And until next time, everyone, thanks for stopping by. Keep hitting the trails, and maybe I'll see you out there.